welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up. If you watched my chatty catch-up video slash January wrap-up that I uploaded towards the middle of the month, you'll know that I've been in a bit of a reading slump so far this year. I really just have not been able to figure out what I am in the mood to read. I didn't really read that much in January, and all the way up to like about the 20th of February, I'd only finished 4 things. So it's actually a miracle that I ended up reading 8 things total in the month of February. Towards the end of the month, I really started to figure out kind of what I was in the mood for, and I picked books that I felt were going to be good to get me out of the reading slump that I was in, and it was basically successful. I don't know that I'm 100% in the clear yet, but I feel myself like kind of on the mend as far as my reading goes, and so I'm totally pleased with all the reading I got done in February, and I'm really excited to talk to you about all these books. One thing I really loved about my January wrap-up is that I really took the pressure off of myself to talk about the books. I didn't worry about the stats or ranking them in order from least to most favorite. I just talked to you about them, and so I think I'm gonna stick with that for a little bit. It feels right, and it feels a little bit less pressury to just talk about the books, so I'm just gonna talk about them. Like I said, I finished 8 books in the month of February, which I'm super happy with. I didn't end up reading any of the books on my 2020 TBR, but I did finish 1 series off of my 11 series to read in 2020 list, and I also managed to read a couple of my most anticipated releases for the entire year, and I also reread an entire series this month. So I am happy with all the reading that I did, and now I'm going to talk to you about the books. Starting with the very first book I finished in the month of February, one of, if not my most anticipated release of 2020, and that is of course The King of Crows by Libba Bray. This is the 4th and final book in the Diviner series, and it is a much anticipated book by many people here in the booktube community and also just in the bookish community in general. It has been a long time coming for this finale, and unfortunately I actually was a little bit let down. So if you don't know, which if you've seen any of my videos recently you do know, but if you don't know, The Diviners is a historical supernatural fantasy series set in 1920s New York City, and it follows a group of teenagers who all have special abilities, and that makes them diviners. Throughout the course of the series, they kind of have to come together to fight these different evils that all lead to a big battle kind of in this 4th and final book. So as I said, I did end up not loving The King of Crows as much as I wanted to, and I think it is a combination of reasons. I think that honestly, I feel like there was too much happening in the book for it to all get resolved in a good way in the amount of time that Libba Bray gave herself to finish it. I feel like she really like built up the story in the first 3 books and had laid it out really well to come to an end in the 4th book, and then she decided to throw in some extra stuff, give us some new information, give us some new characters, and it ended up maybe being too much to finish off in just a short amount of time. Not a short amount of time, the book's over 500 pages, close to 600 I think, but because of the amount of information and the amount of storylines that you're having to tie together in this final book, I felt like she introduced too much new stuff to make the ending worth it. I felt like some of the storylines that we had been reading from book 1, 2, 3 didn't get as much time as they deserved in this 4th and final book because there was some time spent on other things. Also, one of the strongest aspects of this series, in my opinion, is the setting. I feel like the dynamic New York City setting in the 1920s really brings this series to life. I feel like New York City itself is almost like a character in the book because it is so detrimental to the storylines and these characters, and that was really lost in this 4th book because they end up leaving the city for the majority of the book. Our characters all kind of split up, go into different directions. They are all out of New York City, so you're not really getting that magical New York City vibe that the first 3 books had, and I felt like that really took away from the story for me a little bit. Also, like I said, the characters do split up for a good majority of the book, and I find that very frustrating. It's one of my least favorite tropes, especially in a finale. I feel like if they had split up in the middle couple of books, it wouldn't have been as big of a deal, but because this is the last book and I just want to see all of these characters and I want to see how this is all going to come to an end, I got very frustrated having to spend a good majority of the middle of the book reading them separately. I wanted them to all be back together, and it took way too long for them to come back together, in my opinion. Also, I feel like it resolved a little bit too quickly, and I don't know, I just feel like, I almost feel feel like if she was going to introduce all of this new stuff in the 4th book, then it should have been a 5-book series, because I just feel like there wasn't enough time given to some of the storylines that I wanted. And it felt like the characters didn't necessarily feel like the same characters from books 1, 2, and 3, because there was so little time to develop all of their storylines into the ending. And so yeah, ultimately I just was a little bit let down by The King of Crows. I wanted to love it, but I just didn't. After I finished The King of Crows, I kind of felt that reading slump happening. That was kind of the peak reading slump for me, and I felt like I needed to reread something. I felt like I needed to revisit a story that I knew I was going to love. Something fast-paced, action-packed, fun, full of characters and storylines that I love. And so I ended up deciding to reread Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I read the entirety of the Illuminae files in 2019. It was one of my favorite things that I read last year. It was definitely like my favorite series that I read in its entirety in 2019, because it just completely took me by surprise, and I just got so invested in the story and got kind of a little bit obsessed with the series. I read it so quickly. And so I felt like I had given myself enough time that I was allowed to reread it again, and especially trying to get out of a reading slump. If you don't know, the Illuminae Files is this epic space opera sci-fi story about this illegal mining planet that in the 1st book is attacked by this mega corporation, and a lot of the inhabitants of this planet flee from this mega corporation ship and are actually pursued. And the main characters of this book are Katie and Ezra. They have actually just recently broken up, and they are on the ships that are being pursued by this big corporation. Throughout the course of this series, you kind of figure out exactly why this planet was attacked, and you get to see a lot of characters come together in weird and interesting ways, and you get to see all this crazy space fighting and sci-fi goodness, and it's just a really fun series, and something that I knew if I reread this 1st book I would definitely kind of get out of that reading slump. I told myself going in that I was only going to reread Illuminae. I felt like if I just reread the 1st book I would be totally satisfied and I could revisit the rest of the series at a later date, but after I finished Illuminae I couldn't not. So just like the first time I read the series, I ended up jumping straight in to Gemina, which is the 2nd book, and then when I finished that, I read the 3rd book, Obsidio. And just like I did the first time around, I really, really loved the series. It was so much fun, so action-packed and adventurous, and full of just amazing characters and amazing dynamic relationships. I just loved it a lot. Just like I did the first time around, I ended up jointly listening to the audiobooks and reading the physical books for this series, because I felt like that is the best way to experience this series. The audiobooks are productions in themselves, and then obviously the physical books are just case files and IMs, and it's just really interesting to read. So I feel like you have to experience it both ways to get the full effect of this story, and I just loved it. I just loved it so much, and ultimately I think it did pull me out of my reading slump. I feel like I was more excited to read once I reread this entire series, and so yeah, it's still a forever favorite. It's a series that I think I will continue to reread many times for years to come, because I just love it so much. The 2nd book is still my favorite in the series, but I think Katie and Ezra are my favorite couple of the series, which I don't think was the case the first time around, so it was interesting to kind of change my mind on that. And on reread, I definitely can acknowledge that the 3rd book is the weakest in the trilogy. It definitely has some flaws and is maybe wrapped up a little bit too quickly, and you don't get to spend as much time with the new characters, because it's jointly like half new characters and half like revisiting the old characters. But ultimately I just love this series a lot, and I would definitely recommend it if you haven't read it, and I'm so glad to have read it again. It's just solidified itself in my mind as a forever favorite. Next up, I read another of my most anticipated releases for 2020, and that was Wild at Heart by K.A. Tucker. This is the 2nd and what I believe to be the last in the Wild duology, which I started last year when I read the 1st book, The Simple Wild. This is an adult contemporary romance series about a girl named Calla who has a very strained relationship with her father. She hasn't seen him in a long time, and she hasn't talked to him in like 12 years. At the beginning of the book, she gets a call from her father's friend who tells her that he has just recently been diagnosed with cancer and she should come to Alaska to visit him for a couple of weeks. So she decides to go to Alaska for a few weeks to kind of mend her relationship with her father, take care of him for a little while, and just kind of figure out herself along the way. And while she's there, she meets her father's next door neighbor, a man named Jonah, and over the course of her trip, they end up falling in love and forming a relationship. And the second book picks up exactly where the first book left off, and it just follows Calla and Jonah as they try to establish their relationship and figure out what their future looks like. I just love this series a lot. It is so much fun. It is just so light and happy, but also has some sadder and more hard topics, and I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. I read The Simple Wild last year, and it was one of my most surprising reads of 2019 because it really did take me by surprise. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did, and when I found out there was going to be a sequel, I was really excited because I was ready to read more from Calla and Jonah. I liked the second book equally, maybe a little bit less than the first book, but I liked them for completely different reasons. The first book does spend a lot of time focusing on Calla's relationship with her father, and it's much more an exploration of family relationships and mending something that at first seems unmendable. And this second book is more about her relationship with Jonah and establishing that foundation that they need to have some kind of like long-term relationship. The first book is a little bit more action-packed because Jonah and her father are both pilots, and there are some serious and dangerous situations that they get themselves in through the course of the book. And the second book is much more just a slice of life, like seeing them day to day. There is some adventure, some action, some dangerous stuff going on, but at a much smaller scale than the first book. So I feel like they go really well together. I feel like you definitely want to read the second book if you've read the first one, but I also feel like it's a very different feel. Like the stories, the tones are so different. Like I said, I did enjoy the second book just as much as I did the first book, and if you've read The Simple Wild and you haven't checked out Wild at Heart yet, then I would definitely recommend doing so. If you haven't started this series at all and you're looking for something that is quick, fun, romantic, sweet, then this is definitely a series that you're going to want to pick up. In terms of romance, they are definitely lighter on the smut. They're more fade to black than they are just like details of every single interaction that they have, but they still have kind of like a sexy feel to them. So if you're kind of wanting something that is a little bit sexy but not like over the top, then I think that this is definitely a series that you're going to want to read. I really liked it, and I think that it's a series that I could see myself rereading in the future just when I want something like light and fun and romantic. So yeah, I'm glad I read it, and I would definitely recommend you do so as well. After that, I decided that what I really needed as a final push to get me out of that reading slump was to read some mystery thrillers. I find that thrillers always are great go-to kind of palate cleansers for me. I read them fairly quickly, and I almost always just have a ton of fun with them, and so I felt like checking out some thrillers would be the way to go. So the first thriller I ended up picking up was The French Girl by Lyndsay Elliott. This is about a woman named Kate who, when she was just out of college, she and a group of friends spent a week in a cottage in the French countryside, and while they were there, they met and befriended the girl next door. She kind of ended up spending a lot of the week with them, and at the end of the week she disappeared and nobody knew exactly what happened to her. The book takes place 10 years after this, when the girl's body has just recently been discovered in the well, and it becomes clear that somebody in their group of friends ended up killing her and hiding her body in the well. And this book is just about them trying to figure out exactly what happened and who is to blame for this murder. I went into this with a lot of excitement because Lyndsay Elliott is a thriller author that I have seen get quite a bit of praise, and ultimately I didn't love this one as much as I wanted to. I felt like that this was not really a thriller. It was barely a mystery, honestly. It felt fairly obvious how the book was going to end from pretty early on, and so there wasn't really anything that was revealed that I was super surprised by because it all felt very like just basic almost. It felt like obviously these were the things that were going to happen and this was going to be how it ended up. I almost feel like it was more of a romance than a mystery because a lot of the book does spend time focusing on Kate's relationship with one of her male friends who was there that week, and like how their relationship has developed over the course of these 10 years and how they've, you know, harbored these feelings for each other but have never acted on them. Yeah, I don't feel like it was super mysterious. It definitely wasn't thrilling at all, and ultimately I felt like the ending was so disappointing. I felt like there was really not a good resolution to the story at all. You find out kind of everything that happened, you find the details out, but it was really, I don't know, the ending was just weird, and I ended up not loving it as much as I wanted to. It was a fast read. I think I read it in like 2 days because I wanted to know what was going to happen, and I kept hoping that it would get more action-packed, more thrillery, and it never really did. So ultimately it was a bit of a letdown, but I finished it and I immediately wanted to start another thriller, so I felt like that was a good thing. I felt like it was getting me on the right track to reading. And after I finished The French Girl, I ended up picking up Final Girls by Riley Sager, which is the only Riley Sager book that I hadn't read up to this point. I've read his other 2 books, The Last Time I Lied and Lock Every Door. I read them both in 2019, and I felt okay about both of them. They were entertaining, but nothing super special. I went into Final Girls with some low expectations because it is his first book, and so if I didn't like his second and third books, I felt like I was going to like his first book even less. But in a crazy turn of events, Final Girls is actually my favorite book by Riley Sager that I've read. It was just a lot of action-packed fun, and there were actually some things that happened, some reveals that happened in this book that I didn't see coming. So I ended up liking Final Girls a lot more than I expected to. Final Girls revolves around the idea of the final girl, which is a horror movie term referring to the lone survivor of the massacre of horror movies. The main character of this book was the only survivor of a massacre that killed some of her closest friends while they were in college. After the massacre, the main character is hooked up with a couple of other girls who were also final girls of their own massacres, and at the beginning of this book, she finds out that one of the other final girls has died. She has supposedly committed suicide, and the main character just doesn't really think that that's the case. And then the other final girl, the one that she's never met, randomly shows up at her door one day, and they decide to investigate, try to figure out exactly what happened. I just felt like this book was super exciting. I was into it from the very beginning. I think I finished the entire audiobook in a day because I was very invested in the story. I wanted to know how everything was going to play out. And like I said earlier, there were reveals that I definitely didn't see coming. There were definitely some reveals that I saw coming. Like the big reveal at the end, I predicted from pretty early on, but some little things that were revealed throughout the course of the book I really enjoyed because I didn't predict them. I was ready to give up on Riley Sager because I didn't love his other two books as much, but now after reading Final Girls, my interest is renewed in him, and I feel like I will read his new book, which is coming out I think in June. I have said before, and I will continue to say it, if you have never read a mystery thriller, or if you're new to the genre and you're looking for great places to start, then Riley Sager's books are the perfect place to start because they are fast-paced, they're action-packed, they're light, they're not like heavy mysteries that you have to really think about, and ultimately they all are really fun. So if you're looking for something that's all those things, fast-paced, fun, easy, then Riley Sager's books are for you. If you are especially trying to get more into mysteries, then look no further than Final Girls. I'd recommend Final Girls to anybody who's trying to get into the mystery thriller genre. The final book that I read in the month of February was actually a graphic novel. I randomly decided to go through my Kindle and see what ebooks I had, and I ended up having this one as an ebook, and so I read it like the last couple of days of the month, and that was Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, which is the first volume in the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel series by Brian Lee O'Malley. I have seen the Scott Pilgrim movie years ago, like I think right after it came out. I saw it and I thought it was fine. I mean, it was fun, not really my thing, but it was enjoyable, and I went into the graphic novel, the first volume, expecting kind of a similar thing, and it was exactly that. I mean, the graphic novel is basically the first part of the movie, like word for word. So if you've seen the movie, then you'll know like kind of what to expect from these graphic novels. If you don't know, the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel series is about a man named Scott Pilgrim who meets randomly a girl named Ramona Flowers one day, and he kind of becomes obsessed with her. He befriends her and they end up starting to date, and then she reveals to him that if he wants to continue to date her, he is going to have to battle and win her 7 evil exes. And this first volume is just about him battling the first evil ex and all the craziness that ensues from that. It is this weird, like crazy, silly series, but if you have seen the movie and you liked it, then I would definitely recommend giving the graphic novels a go. And if you're looking for something fun and fast-paced and that has a really beautiful, colorful art style, then I would definitely recommend picking up the graphic novels because they actually are really fun, and I think that I will eventually continue on and finish the series. I do think that the series is fun. I mean, it's not anything super special, it's not groundbreaking, it's not mind-blowing, but it was entertaining, and I think that's kind of what I need right now while I'm still trying to get out of this reading slump. So those are all the books that I ended up reading in the month of February. It started off kind of slow, but it got better as the month went on, and I'm happy to say that I can definitely feel my desire to read coming back, so hopefully March will continue to be even better than February was. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to me? I would really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you read in February, or maybe your favorite book that you read in February. I'd really love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!